If you're not currently muted, please put yourself on mute. Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Lisa Fishbayn Joffe. I am the director of the Hadassah-Brandeis Institute at Brandeis University. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the fourth and final session of this year's.
There was some kind of app or something.
I'm going to ask our staff to make sure that everybody in
different classes you could go in and different sessions.
You would set up your agenda, your personal agenda, your profile.
Did you finish with that? Or?
Welcome again. My name is Lisa Fishbayn Joffe. I am the director of the Hadassah-Brandeis Institute at Brandeis University. Apologies for a few little technical blips today. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this fourth and final session of this year's Studio Israel program. Studio Israel is an online conversation series that looks at Israeli culture and diversity through the lens of contemporary Israeli artists and creatives. Shared by our colleague Caron Tabb, it is a partnership amongst the Hadassah-Brandeis Institute, the Jewish Arts Collaborative, the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies at Brandeis, and the Vilna Shul, and it's made possible by generous support from Combined Jewish Philanthropies here in Boston. Today, Tamar Nissim is joining us from Israel to discuss her show Contagious Truths, which is currently on exhibit in HBI's Kniznik Gallery in the Women's Studies Research Center at Brandeis University. She will be in conversation with Professor Shoshana Madmoni-Gerber, an expert on what has come to be called the Yemenite Babies Affair, an historical event that is a central theme of the show. After being online for the last 2 years due to COVID, we feel very fortunate to be hosting Contagious Truths. Tamar joined us from Israel for the opening last month, which was the first public event that we've had in those 2 years, and the show has been a tremendous success. Tamar and our curator, Olivia Baldwin, have met with 9 Brandeis University classes, exploring a range of themes raised in the show, including Mizrahi history and identity in Israel, the history of Jewish midwifery, and gender and the regulation of the maternal body. And in our program today, Tamar will discuss the show and set it in the context of her other work. Tamar Nissim is an interdisciplinary artist based in Tel Aviv. Guided by archival research, she traces the influence of historic traumatic events on women and children. In transforming this research into performance, video, and photography, Nissim interweaves themes of familiar relationships, militarism, and nationalism with culture and politics. Centering femininity and remembering through the body, Nissim reveals non-hegemonic perspectives, raises questions about identity, and confronts women and children's unspoken traumas from the past as she reflects on those of the present. Tamar Nissim exhibits her work widely in national and international museums, galleries, and nonprofit institutions. Some recent exhibitions include the Kaunas Biennale in Lithuania, the Guimarães Biennale in Portugal, and many museums in Israel, including the Tel Aviv Museum, Museum Bat Yam, Hamishkan Ein Harod, and the Indie Collective Gallery. Tamar Nissim holds a BA honors in textile design from Shenkar College and attended the Advanced Artist Program at Midrasha School of Art, where she earned a Master's of Education in Art Education. She is the recipient of many awards, including 4 Rabinovich Foundation grants, a 2019 Hapais Council for the Culture of Arts grant, and the Israeli Minister of Culture's Prize. Today, we are also privileged to welcome Professor Shoshana Madmoni-Gerber of Suffolk University, whose work as a journalist and historian illuminates some of the central themes in Contagious Truths. Professor Madmoni-Gerber was born and raised in Israel to parents of Yemenite descent. She holds a master's degree in communication and journalism from Hebrew University in Jerusalem and a PhD in communication from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. She has worked as a journalist in Israel for several publications, including Yediot Aharonot, Shishi, Hadashot, and Hapatish newspapers, and did research for the investigative show Uvda on Channel 2. She has also worked as a researcher and diversity trainer for ADVA Center for Equality of Israeli Society. She joined the faculty of Suffolk University in 2004 and teaches courses in journalism, media, and documentary film. She is the author of Israeli Media and the Framing of Internal Conflict, and this a book which examines bias within the state of Israel and the media at large through the lens of the news coverage of the Yemenite Babies Affair. So I'm going to first invite Tamar to begin the program, and then Shoshana will join and offer reflections on the work and the underlying history discussed in it. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, so you can put your questions in the chat at any time, and I will pose those to our speakers. So please join me now in welcoming Tamar Nissim. Tamar,
you're muted. Unmute yourself. We can't hear you yet.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, I
Yeah.
can. And Tamar, let me know
Now-
when you want me to share the visual, if you're ready.
You can start with the first one.
Okay. Just give me a
Hi
moment.
everyone. I'm sorry I can't see what you're showing because of a technical problem. So I will just tell you when to change it. Okay. Hi everyone. I would like to thank Lisa Fishbayn, Joffe, and the Hadassah-Brandeis Institute staff, including Olivia Baldwin, curator, and Suzanne Metrican, former curator and director, and the Schusterman Center for Israeli Studies for the opportunity to have the exhibition at Kniznik Gallery and for their great help. Today, I would like to share with you my ongoing research as a video, photography, and performance artist living in Israel. In my work, I explore national and personal identities in Israel society. Since 2016, I have investigated the connection between hygiene and national identity in the private and in the public sphere. I found that hygiene methods have fundamental part in polarization and racism towards women from non-hegemonic society in Israel. Can you pass to the next? The exhibition Contagious Truths is a journey to Palestine, Eretz Israel in the mid-20th century. In this exhibition, I explore the powerful impact of hygiene methods and basic household tasks on the identity of Jewish immigrants in the newborn stage. Can you pass to the next one? The first segment in the journey is Jabotinsky 38 in Tel Aviv, the house which my mother was raised. In this work, I confront my childhood memories with my grandmother's obsessive cleaning habits. I asked my mother and her friends to share with me their hygiene habits in their childhood in Tel Aviv in the 1940s. My mother told me how she was playing with the Arab neighbors from the new village, how the Arab women were working as housekeepers in her neighborhood, and how her mother was keeping everything clean and tidy in their tiny apartment. It was a model of mothers, she says, to be very tidy and clean. The next one, thank you. While interviewing one of my mother's childhood friends, I had a breakthrough in my understanding of the power of hygiene. It was the first time I realized after so many years that my grandmother was a victim to racism as a Mizrahi Jew from Bukharian origin. She was a wife of my Polish grandfather, and she lived in an Ashkenazi neighborhood. I realized that her obsession for hygiene was a way of proving she was a good mother and wife, though she was not from Ashkenazi origin. She had to be the cleanest wife among her neighbors, and her daughter, my mother, had to be the tidiest girl among her friends. In the video, my daughter braiding her hair, and I could imagine my grandmother as if she was coming out of an old family photo, braiding her curly hair. The next one, please. The video Banana relates to a story that runs in the family about the hygiene habits of my grandmother. We were joking that she used to clean everything with hot water, even bananas. This story came into my mind when I found a document in the Municipal Archive of Tel Aviv from 1929. The law in the mandatory time in Tel Aviv forbidden buying bananas for peddlers, mainly poor Arab farmers who serve to prevent the spread of disease. I realized that cleaning the banana was a part of the fear that was spread by the institutions and was connected to the fear of the emerging immigrant society in Tel Aviv. The next one, please. This is part of the exhibition. In the middle, you can see a table, and on the table, and I was referring to the household and medical objects that were part of my research and became also part of the props in the video, the hygiene project, which I will talk about later. These objects are like time capsules. They have strong impact on people and became like triggers for hidden traumas. Can you pass to the next one, please? The second station in my journey is Drop of Milk. This was the name of the health nurse station that were established in Jerusalem. In this healthcare station, nurses began directing mothers on how to take care of their newborn babies. They had enormous success in reducing infant mortality. You can see it in this diagram, but the patronizing attitudes reflected the racist agenda of the medical authority towards women, especially Palestinians and Jews from Muslim origin. In the diagram, you can see that the mortality is divided according to Ashkenazi and Mizrahi origin. Can you go to the next one, please? In this video, the national health, I take a role of a healthcare nurse that educates low-income mothers how to raise their children. The text is drawn from hygiene textbooks for health care from the mid-20th century. The medical institution had preconceptions that these mothers were incapable of raising healthy children, and they were not educated to follow the Western hygiene methods. Can you go to the next one, please? This video, which is called The Trail to Good Health, is based on a propaganda film from Israeli Defense Force archive. In the film, a Yemenite family is flying on an oriental carpet. I was inspired by this film and by the advertisement of a nurse holding a new hospital as on a tray. The huge nurses holding the Yemenite mother and the baby on a carpet relates to the medical establishment attitude towards the immigrants from a Muslim origin countries. The next one, please. Thank you. The third stage in the journey is a baby house, a nursery, which in the immigration camp in the beginning of the 50s. During the big wave of immigration, the Jews from Muslim and Balkan countries to Israel in the 50s were in these immigration camps. Nurses were persuaded to believe that raising children according to the Western hygiene methods was more important than raising them in their nuclear families. This film is based on testimonies from Yemenite Children Affair committees that investigated the disappearance of thousands of children in the 50s. What happened to these babies who disappeared is still a mystery more than 70 years later. The next one, please. In 2017, the testimonies of the Yemenite, Mizrahi, and Balkan Affair committees were opened to the public. I spent 3 years researching the archives before starting the process of making the film. The next, please. I decided to focus on the nursery house at the immigration camp, as it was the first place where mothers were separated from their babies when they immigrated to Israel. The families were accommodated in tents, and the babies were taken to one of the few stone buildings in the camp for their protection. But what began with good intentions became one of the great tragedies of the newborn country. Next, please. These photos from the nursery in one of the camps seem to be taken in the same nursery, in the nursery of one of the immigration camps that was mostly inhabited by Yemenite immigration. I based the location of my film on these photos, as you can see in the next slide. The next slide, please. My latest video is based on testimonies on the part of the medical institutions in the disappearance, kidnapping, and adoption of children. In the testimonies, the women stated that they only saw other women committing the crime. In my video, they confess that they were part of the system and ask for forgiveness. For me, this is the power of art, to take a side and act. And in this, and you can see that behind every one of these testimonies, I stand and I was taking the part of asking for forgiveness. The next one, please. This is the last slide, and I would like to thank you very much for joining me for this journey.
Thank you, Tamar. That was fascinating, and I encourage people to put questions in the chat. Now I'm going to invite Shoshana Madmoni-Gerber to offer her reflections on this theme.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Tamar and the Brandeis Institute for inviting me to take part of this conversation. And thank you for the beautiful introduction. I'll just make a small correction. I'm not a historian by training. I worked as a journalist for about 6 years and then trained as a communication scholar. But looking at the history and thinking about the history is a big part of what I do. And as to quote Stuart Hall, we can't separate our identity. He defines culture as a site of struggle. And I find that to be one of the most useful ways to think about identity. We can see it in the United States as well. So, and it's always the negotiation and the retelling of narratives, especially of hidden narratives that are a big part of how we think about our own identity. And I think that what Tamar just presented so beautifully and what my work is done as well is kind of a contribution to that ongoing process. And so I'll start with just telling you in a minute how I got to work on this topic. I chose to start with the first a slide, which is the cover for my book, and I'll tell you in a minute why I picked this. I am, as you said, I was born to a family of Yemenite descent, and so I was exposed to these stories from very early on as a child, especially to the very tragic story of the abduction of my aunt's baby, which was mere days from when she arrived in Israel, and it was one of the stories of a physical abduction from her hands. So, you know, my first inclination was to put it aside, because I think as a child, I just didn't know what to do with this narrative. But over the years, and I wrote about it later, I did think about my reaction and why I reacted the way that I did. And that I was like many Mizrahim of my generation. I don't know how many people are familiar with this term, Ishtaknezet, is that I just wanted to be Ashkenazi, and I just wanted to be part of the collective, because so many messages were encouraging us, whether directly or indirectly, to push back. And also it's a narrative that didn't fit with it. If I'm thinking about the master narrative, as Ella Shochat calls it, is about you know, how Zionism rescued Jews. And here we have a narrative about Jews victimizing other Jews, and a narrative about racism and marginalization, and it's really hard to comprehend. So this picture here, I chose that its mother's in 1949, and it kind of represents to me a moment of happiness, that moment of a mother bonding with a child that was basically taken away from them. That was the moment that was robbed, the future, the life that were robbed. And as you can see here, all the children look happy and healthy. That didn't really coincide with, you know, other tales of starvation and so on, and the reasons that were articulated of why they had to be separated. So I will use just a few minutes to kind of orient you to what this affair is about. So in between 48 and 1950, the state of Israel airlifted nearly 15,000 Jews from Yemen. During the immigration process, hundreds, if not thousands, of these babies were disappeared from immigrants and absorption transit camps throughout Israel, and also from the transit camp Hashed in Yemen. How this happened is because the absorption policy and that was a policy that was instructed and forced upon them. So it was not by any means a negotiation. Their agency was completely taken away from them. So the Yemenites were, the official excuse was that because they were put in tents and tents, that the babies were taken to the stone structure that was called a baby house, and it was better for them. Usually the babies were taken during the night when parents were not there, but I will share in a moment a testimony with you that was a little bit different, that baby is taking literally similar to my aunt's story from her arms. And when parents, from testimonies that we've collected, that the commission collected, when parents were present and refused, they report that the authorities forcefully took the children from their hands, even acting violently. So a typical scenario was that a child would fall ill. The authorities said that they took the child to the hospital. Parents would ask, when are you bringing my child back? And it would be a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And then the child would never come back. Later, we found out from some of these documents that Tamar showed in the drawings there, they went from that to recovery centers in Vitzo, controlled by Vitzo, in Tzfat, in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem. And then from there, they were probably taken to adoption. That's what we think. So I want to share with you, and again, all the while, institutional representative nurses, other caregivers, clerks were telling the commission that the parents were not interested in their children. So to contrast those two testimonies, and I know, Lisa, we're going to talk later about representation and the issue of voice, we can develop this point a little more. So I'm going to share with you a short testimony by Naomi Gavra. Let me get out of this for a minute. And the testimony was given to the show Uvda that, as you said, I've worked for. And so it's in Hebrew. Sorry, hold on one second. It's in Hebrew. So I'm going to share, I'll put the volume down and just a couple of minutes, because I think it's important that you would hear it from a mother, so that you can feel her words. This happened in En Shemer. And the item is titled From Mommy's Hands. It featured 4 stories of babies that were taken from their mothers or fathers. This says baby house, no entry, the sign, which is also important. She was on her way back from the hospital. A couple of days later, Naomi Gavra gave birth to her son, Zion. It was in the winter of 1949. What kind of a child was he, Zion? He was sweet. He looked like my father-in-law, the old guy. Do you still miss him? Even if I miss him, are they going to give him back to me? He's not going to know me, but at least I want to feel good to kiss him and to tell him, you're my son, you're my son. Zion was in this baby house like the rest of the kids, and she was allowed to nurse him 3 times a day. One night, she was alone with another caregiver. Her name was Bracha. She had no idea what was about to happen. It was 8 o'clock at night. All of a sudden, there were 3, 2 women and a man. He had beard to here, and he was bald. And the 2 women were maybe 40, 45 years old. They came and they spoke Yiddish, and they took children. What do you mean? They took children. It was like a room, in a room, in a room. So I said, Bracha, I see that they're taking babies. Where are they taking them to? And she said, I don't know. I said, well, ask them. And she said, but they're speaking Yiddish. I don't know. So I said, ask them in Hebrew. So she said, where are you taking them? And they said to the doctor. Where? Be'er Yaakov. South. When are they going to come back? A week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So I sat there with my baby, and they went with 14 babies. I remember I was counting. All of a sudden, I thought they would leave, and I'll take my child and leave. They came back, and they said, give us your baby. And I said, no, I don't want to. And they said, and I held him like that. One of them took my hands like that, and the other one snatched the baby, and they ran. And I chased them like from here. I didn't know. All right, so this ends with another testimony of a nurse actually saying that the commission didn't know what happened to Naomi's child, and a nurse's testimony saying that she saw people coming and talking in English about taking children, and she told her mother, and her mother said, it was probably for money. It's none of your business. Don't say anything. So I have a couple, Lisa, I have a couple more slides about the commission. I don't know if you want me to continue or for
I think
the.
so, because there are questions in the chat
Okay.
about, what happened and what's the contemporary response. So
Okay.
please go ahead.
Oh, so go ahead. All right. So this is just quickly so you would be aware. The affair became more publicly known in the 60s outside of the Yemeni community. I can expand on that later. Some of it was because these children were not actually dead, and they got, as anybody in Israel, draft notice to go to the military. And when they didn't show, and the military start showing in people's homes, asking about these supposed dead children, then people started to understand that we're talking about a much larger phenomenon than isolated cases. And that prompted the Yemeni community to organize the first real organization of Yemeni collecting testimonies in the Yemeni community. And that prompted the first commission, was called Baalul Minkowski. It's really important to note, so 3 commissions in total. The first 2 was inquiry commissions only. So to those of you who have legal education, there is a big difference. It's not just semantics between inquiry and investigative. Those 2 commissions ran their investigation behind closed doors. We had besides the reports, don't know what went on there. And they did not have a power to subpoena, which is the biggest issue here. So one commission between 67 and 68, another one in between 88 and 95. And that's where I am starting to work in the early 90s and discovering that there is a commission that nobody knows about. When I worked in this newspaper that you mentioned, Lisa, Hapatish, which is in Hebrew, the hammer. And their slogan was the newspaper that will crack your head open. And I think that kind of symbolically, that's what happened to me when I realized the magnitude of the affair and I first started to investigate this. So you can see that it comes, the institutional response is always in waves and in response to the Yemeni community, with the final one in 95 to 2001. It was the only investigative commission, but unfortunately, even if they had the power to subpoena, they didn't use it all the time. They didn't force witnesses to speak. They didn't run proper investigation. And just so in a minute, I will get into the criticism, but if you want to know how many cases we're talking about, so in total, all 3 commissions listened to 1,053 cases, but a newer research by Natan Shifris, who is a historian, documents over 2,000 cases, and this is the breakdown. Legal scholar Boston Gero terms he analyzed the commission's report and basically said that it was lacking the most central tool for any investigation, which is an epistemology of suspicion. So basically they went in trying, instead of investigating, trying to convince us that nothing happened. And what I show in my research is that the media's standpoint and the media's epistemology was very similar. So the report is full of contradiction. They didn't fully use their power to subpoena. Important lines of investigations were dropped, including the line of investigating in the United States and cases of adoption and connection to the United States. And crucial testimonies were given in behind closed doors, even though they were by their mandate supposed to do everything in open doors. And we fought for many years to get access to, at first all the records were sealed for 70 years. So now they opened, and as Tamar mentioned, I've looked also at some of it closed again, and they didn't open everything. And just one example of obstruction of justice that they completely ignore is records that they asked for from Hillel Yafo Hospital. And instead of bringing them to the commission, they burned them. And the commission termed this in the report and that it was an administrative failure, and is saying that they were accidentally burned. So even something like that is not fully investigated, which leaves us with much of the information still unknown. So I will end here.
Thank you. I'm going to invite, there's Tamar back on the screen. There are a number of questions in the chat. I'm going to ask those in the time we have left, and we'll go a few minutes over because we started a bit late. But I wanted to ask both of you about the challenge of exploring these issues. What, Tamar, in your work, you talk about how this links up to your own identity. Can you expand a bit on that and what it means for you to be addressing this? So I'll start with Tamar and then ask Shoshana.
For me, it's quite complicated because my state in the position of investigating, because when I was introduced to, I knew about it, but I was just diving into it after the archives were open, and I was trying to find the place I'm in this identity mixture. Because I'm not Yemenite, I didn't have something like this that happened in my family, but I was like driven into it, and I felt that it had a very strong impact on me. So, and then I realized that my family was here at that time. My grandparents came to Israel in the beginning of the 20th century, and for me, I was taking in this part of my ongoing research, the part of the one that were here. They were not the immigrants, but the ones that were more established in Israel. You might say the Ashkenazi part, which is not only Ashkenazi, but the more established part of the society. And I thought about this part, what made them do such things. This was what driving me into this project. And then I realized that the hygiene has this strong impact on shaping the behavior of people and making them do things that it seems like doing the proper thing, but we're doing like really crimes under, you know, the establishment ideology. So this was my way of dealing with this project from my point of view.
Thank you. Shoshana?
Yeah, so for me, it's something that I constantly think about. I do my research on representation, and so obviously I think about voice constantly. Who is speaking, from what standpoint, what kind of agenda is being advanced, what kind of ideology is being advanced, who benefits from it, right? But on the flip side of it is who is absent, who is being silenced, what kind of perspective is being marginalized and denied access completely. So, and then where do I fit in with this? So it's kind of representation within representation, because I'm constantly thinking about my privilege and my voice, because we are privileged to speak about it, and we each has, you know, access to our voice within our discipline. So Tamar, you as an artist, and I'm within the academia. So I find that, you know, part of probably what motivated me is as sometimes it's termed, the burden of representation, of feeling that how is it possible that even I didn't believe them? Why is it that we like to push this kind of stories to the side? Why do we not want to deal with it? But also, what is it that is making me to come up with specific interpretation? Because I don't think that, even though I'm Yemenite, I am not them. I have to separate my experience into, I wasn't an immigrant that didn't know, although I'm kind of an immigrant in this country now, but I didn't come here from a weakened position. And I think that's really important, that to understand that position, our own privileges, because I still am here writing about it and was able to publish a book about it and lecture about it. And so I'm constantly thinking about this duality.
Thank you.
And I add something,
Yeah.
a small thing, maybe because I see some of the remarks that I'm not justifying things by hygiene. I'm just trying to hygiene for me is like a way to investigate a point of view, more like a point of view, and it for me it relates for our recent time how hygiene became a way of controlling people. So this is not as justification, but a way of to understand the system, and how the institutions make people think in the way they want them to think.
So I think that's a powerful message of the show, that hygiene is a conduit or a vocabulary for talking about race, talking about social control, talking about sort of institutional preferences about who should parent. And that's something that's coming up in the chat as well. I wonder if I can invite you both to comment sort of more explicitly about the link between this hygiene discourse and the removal of children and ideologies of race. Shoshana, do you want to start?
So you want to start? Yeah. So of course it was part of the ideology, and it's really important actually to speak about it as such, because this is how the whole healthcare system in Israel came to be. And when you read some of the text that was written by Yosef Meir and others, and they were influenced by theories of eugenics. And this was an in for them. So at the same time, you're marketing this idea of saving people. I mean, some of the newspaper articles that I looked at, the Yemeni people are always described as dirty, filthy, diseased. So it's always then the suggestion or the remedy for this is to teach them how to do even the simplest thing. I saw in one article, for example, they described the Yemenis as peeking through the window and seeing for the first time how to bathe a baby and how to change a baby's diaper. That's a quote. So again, the thought that, what did they do in Yemen? They didn't actually in Yemen, when I investigated a little further, they did what we like to call in Cambridge, or in the United States now, attachment parenting. That's what they did. What we, need to read books to kind of come up. This was their instinct to have the baby attached to their bodies and to sleep with the baby. And even their custom to feed baby, to breastfeed for a long time, is something that was interpreted as lack of care. So all this was an in for the institutions to say, okay, here's what we're going to do, and to take charge, and to, first of all, separation. So once the children are taken away from you, then the parents are not there and you can do whatever you want. And then when we discovered after that, the track of the disappearance or the kidnapping is that it's also a medical reason. The child was sick and we had to take them to the hospital. And then they went to recovery center. And then because from the beginning, we're thinking that they don't care about it. Then when you hear a nurse that's testifying and saying, well, we never saw Yemeni parents. And the prosecutor asked her, and it didn't surprise you? It didn't, that where were they? And she said, well, they just told us that they don't care about them. They had too many babies. So all these preconceived notions and racist ideologies about them, which the hygiene and healthcare was quite a central piece, is leading to these actions and then leading to the justification of what happens, and then obviously to the long decades of denial. We had to do it.
Tamar, do you want to share your reflections from your research?
I will continue. A lot of things that Shoshi said I was putting inside the film that I made, and I was making this film like I was separating it and made it like a group of nurses against a group of Yemenite women. It was 5 nurses and 5 Yemenite mothers. And all these small talks, what was Shoshi saying, I saw them again and again in the testimonies, and I was like quoting them. And when I put it in the mouth of actresses, it sounds so terrible. It sounds so racist. It sounds so, and many people, and I see over here also people are asking. It was very few years after the end of the Holocaust, and a lot of these women were victims of the Holocaust. So it's like very, very strange to hear the same way of thinking, how it developed came to Israel, like in the behind door or like in the so it was very interesting. And also the things that about breastfeeding, in my film there is a small part that there was like a confrontation between a nurse and a Yemenite mother, and the nurse said, why did you come to breastfeed your child? He's almost 2 years old. And she's saying, if I want breastfeeding, I would be pregnant again. And she was like, she didn't understand it, because it was like a common knowledge in societies that this was a way to prevent a pregnancy, but it was considered as like something that is totally imaginative or something like this. So all these small things that now we know, they were telling they knew what they were talking about. The nurses considered these things as something that very foolish or things like that. So it was.
There are a number of questions in the chat asking in different ways about what we know now about what happened to these children. Were they adopted? Did they pass away? Did they simply disappear and there is no trace of what happened to them? Can you talk a bit about what we know, what these 3 inquiries and investigative commissions have determined? And then there's also a question about what if any, remedies were made available to these families? And are there any stories of families being reunited? So what can you tell us about that?
The commissions just detail a handful of stories that were reunited. One of David Shuker, for example. We had the famous story of Tzila Levin that was that we either had issues with the DNA testing that was widely, also not widely maybe, but was reported in the New York Times in the United States as well. So those two questions are kind of connected. Part of the problem is that from the beginning, the investigation, when it was possible to discover, when it was possible to trace the kids, was not done properly. So that's the first problem. And right now, still the position of the state is to go with the investigative report, despite all the problems with it, with its conclusion, which is 90% of them died, even though we have very serious doubts. And we know that, I mean, right now we didn't get an evidence for that. There are issues with, with graves and some things that just don't make sense. That in the United States, in Israel, you will bury, in the Jewish state, you will bury children without telling their parents, without having them sit shiva. How are we going to talk about, would we have talked about it if it was done to us by another nation? And the question, I've seen a few questions of the issue of remedy, how do we resolve this, is we're talking about, somebody asked, I think, about reparations, that we can't get to reparation if there isn't even acknowledgement. And probably the bigger problem, and I see another question from Shula about, how it happens, how it still happens with some of the Yemeni community and with the Ethiopians. And Esther Herzog is a sociologist who writes about it, and she says it in her writing that it's the same mechanism. And I think that's our biggest loss as a society, that we don't have the courage to open the wounds and talk about this openly with full transparency. And we can't get to talk about reparation or apology before we have all the information. So right now we are kind of stuck with it. And this is part of, I say it to sometimes when I speak in my synagogue in other places, I hate to say it to all my Jewish sisters and brothers, we are not that special. Similar stories and motivated by racism happened in other nations. We saw the Pope apologizing now to the Aborigines in Canada. We know the Australian story, but it happened in other places, in Spain, in Ireland, in Guatemala, and so on. So we need to take that step in order to prevent reoccurring things that just happened with Ethiopian women that were giving against their will, without their knowledge, again, to control the issue of the children, because the assumption is they have too many children, they can't take care of this alone. We are taking charge of this and giving them the Provera injections to make sure they don't get pregnant again. This is horrifying. This just happened a few years ago.
I want to read you, as we come close to the end, I want to read you the English translation of the government apology that was issued by the Israeli government last year in 2021. It said, in part, the government of Israel regrets the events that happened in the early days of the state and recognized the suffering of families whose children were part of this painful issue. And it established a fund used to compensate families for pain and suffering. But notably, it says the government regrets. But do you consider that an apology? That's sort of the first question. And the second question is for Tamar, because you ended your presentation with your own apology, where you used the language of women who had been involved in this as nurses and medical professionals, but you held up the sign yourself and spoke in your own voice. Can you talk about the role apology plays in your approach?
I felt, for me, because as I told you, because I'm not the, I was like, I was looking at this tragic event, and but I'm a little bit from the outside, and I was like trying to find my way in it. What is my state, from which point of view I'm talking about it. So from the very beginning, I knew that I have to make like a closure, like not just to talk about this episode, but to say something, as I told you, as my part, because I'm from mixed origins. I thought I'll take my Ashkenazi part, and for this part I will try to apologize, because I thought that it's something that was not done, and if it was done, it was not done in the proper way and in the proper strength of what should be done. So I was like trying to understand the thinking how apology can be make, and I made these 9 women, and everyone was trying her way for apology. Some were more they say sorry, and you feel that they were sorry, and some were more apologetic. And a lot of people that came, it was in a gallery in Israel, people that came and they were like, I think maybe it was the most shocking part of the exhibition, because people were saying, did that happen that way that you are talking about it? Because this was more like, I was mixing all these kind of stories that was about it, and people were really shocked from this part of apology.
They shocked by the fact that you wanted to apologize?
No, they shocked by the stories.
Oh, the story, okay.
They were shocked by the stories, the way that when people say I did it, and so it makes it like it really happened. So it was much more easy to understand the story.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll just say something about the apology as a state move. So first of all, in reality, we only have a handful of nurses that came in and say, I saw them taking children. I saw that it happens, because again, the investigation was not done properly. So what the Israeli state was doing, that part that you read, was in response to the fact that there is a group of families that are suing the state in a class action. And what the court system in Israel tried to do for several years to really exhaust the families and do the exact opposite of what you do when you apologize as a state. They try to separate those cases and not let them make a case for a class action. So it was only recently, a couple of years ago, I think 2-3 years ago, that the Supreme Court said, no, it's a class action. They can sue like that. It's the same story. And of course, one talks about a system and the other one, oh, it just happened to one person. So Israel is still fighting that, and that's the state. And what they were afraid of is that we will now have more lawsuits. And so they decided to come up with this kind of weirdly phrased apology that we're sorry about what happened in the, which is not really taking responsibility. What families are looking for is, first of all the information, which we still don't have, and acknowledgement and full and unequivocal apology, responsibility by the state with all that means. Something in the form of what we've seen, for example, in Australia. But in other places too, even with the Pope, that were other people that were talking about, the hardship of accepting it so late, and that he himself reversed a position that he had before, that he didn't want to apologize, so that the church won't apologize as an organization. So even if I look at Australia, and if anybody's interested, you can look it up, or I can share a clip in the chat. It's Kevin Rudd, then Prime Minister in 2018. Even though the state acknowledged it in much better and transparent and open investigation 10 years earlier, they did not want to do this apology. So the apology is, I see it as a last step. It's very needed. But it is really a last step in a long process of healing. And what he does there is just incredible to hear, how he apologized in the name of the Australian government and personally as now the Prime Minister. And the objection to doing that, if anybody cares to research a little bit about it, is that it's everything that you hear here when you try to discuss reparation for slavery, or we didn't do it, it's not our fault. It's like that resentment for taking a collective responsibility. And that's something that's very different. And so, if anybody wants to look at that speech, you will see, just look at the faces of all the Aborigine people, the First Nation people who are listening to this apology and what it does to them, to their mental state. And I think that you will get that point. But we are very far from this in this case, unfortunately.
We're going to have to wrap up, but I want to ask a question that's come up a couple times in the chat about DNA. So you've both relied on testimony and material in the archives, but there is another source that could connect people to their families, which is something that could be available even as the people who may testify are passing on. Is there any move to create a DNA database so that people who felt they might be descendants of these families could find connection? Do either of you know if that is something?
Oh, yeah. I do know that there is an effort, and it started several years ago. It's like to create a DNA bank, and it started by a Knesset member that was active on this. So it's been done, but that DNA bank, you're always relying on other people on the other end, trying to bring their sample as potential children. So in order to create a match. And that's a little more tricky because again, if we're talking about a few thousands that were spread around the world, I mean, you are looking for a needle in a haystack. That's not something that is, if anybody was thinking that we're just going to see massive of Yemeni, children coming in, and everybody is walking happy into the sunset, it's not exactly going to happen like that. But I hope that with, the prevalence of social media, with DNA testing, so I know that some organizations are utilizing that and doing work on that, yeah.
I would like to add that DNA in Israel is forbidden. It started, but because of religious laws, it became forbidden. You are not allowed. You can't do a DNA test in Israel.
What you're talking about? What do you mean? Like in terms of? I know
Like
it
a
was an
paternity
issue with the
test?
grave.
You can't do it in Israel. You can do it just abroad, because in Israel it's because they're afraid of other things, not Yemenite finding their parents or children, but from that because of Jewish laws that would that you'll see that mamzerim and things like bastards and things like that. So in Israel, it's forbidden now to make a DNA test, as I know it. I know that MyHeritage started doing it, but now you can't do it in Israel.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it was an issue with opening graves. That was a big religious issue, which is why they didn't want.
Yeah, but this is also another religious issue. So we have a lot of because it's like you might find things that about families, other things that you don't want to find. So that's so now it's not. You can't do it in Israel.
That is a very interesting intersection with challenging issues in Jewish family law that rear their head in so many contexts. I want to thank you both for a really fascinating presentation, and I want to thank Tamar for, you can see in the chat, raising the awareness in the community here of this really important issue and sort of the powerful perspective you offer on Israeli history. I want to encourage people to come and see the show, which is on exhibit in the Knisnik Gallery in the Women's Studies Research Center here at Brandeis through the summer. I think we can put the dates in the chat, or if you've attended, you'll get a follow-up email. And I also want to encourage people to read Professor Madmoni-Gerber's book, which is, again, called Israeli Media and the Framing of Internal Conflict. And thank you all for joining us. This, as I said, is the last session of Studio Israel for this academic year, but we will be back again in the fall, and we look forward to having you joining us then. And if you're a fan of HBI, we still have a few events coming up this term. We have Marcia Falk talking about her new feminist Haggadah on Monday, and some other terrific events. So you can subscribe to our mailing list and join us for those. Thank you very much. And we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tamar.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.